All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can follow me on X at bdomenech. Write the show at bigben@fox.com. Follow show at Big Ben Show Fox. And I want to thank you for all of the different comments and feedback that you've been giving us. It's helped us trend in all sorts of different ways on the socials, I am told, and I appreciate it very much. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about a situation in Virginia that is very much at odds with the traditional Virginia way, the politics of gentlemanly, cordial behavior, something that has extended back in the Old Dominion for eons, and that is really just the vestiges of an old genteel way of doing things, something that has been dead in Virginia for a very long time. It tends to get invoked when the Washington Post wants to go after someone like George Allen, and then said and dismissed when something like Ralph Northam and the gigantic combination of blackface scandals and sexual assault accusations threatens the future of prominent Democrats. Well, we have one of those incidents playing out in Virginia today, and it's one that, if you've been paying attention to the news surrounding one of those rare off-year gubernatorial elections, one that tends to always swing in the opposite direction of the party in power in the White House, you yourself may even have heard of. It's about the Attorney General in the race, someone who is trying to hold on to his seat, Jason Miyares, versus Jay Jones, a Democrat delegate who achieved the Democratic nomination and was part of a ticket headed up by Abigail Spanberger, someone who has been touted as being a potential even 2028 hopeful from the Democratic side as a presidential candidate potentially, and someone who was feted by the party establishment, backed by Bill and Hillary Clinton and numerous Washington Democrats, backed by the Washington Post and major media figures, an ex-CIA spy who's done very little in her political career and yet hits all the right notes and knows how to stick to a script. Well, someone who didn't stick to a script is Jay Jones, her running mate. In a series of text messages, he said some things that are, quite frankly, so awful that even the likes of Morning Joe had to admit it.
Coming up, an attorney general candidate in Virginia is apologizing for his texts about a state lawmaker. We'll go through what the messages said.
He should probably be forced to withdraw from the race, and probably is doing a lot there.
Yes, probably is doing a lot there. Let's run through these texts that were reported initially by National Review this past week. They were a series of texts that began apparently with an accidental exchange with a Republican member of the House of Delegates, responding to, at the time, some very kind words that then Speaker Todd Gilbert, a Republican, had been saying about an older Democrat representative who had passed away, was fondly remembering him in a positive light, that sort of thing. And for whatever reason, that type of remembrance prompted this reaction from Jones. If those guys die before me, I will go to their funerals to piss on their graves, send them out awash in something. 3 people, 2 bullets. Gilbert, Hitler, and Pol Pot. Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head. Spoiler, put Gilbert in the crew with the 2 worst people you know, and he receives both bullets every time. The response from the Republican delegate in question was to tell him to stop, tell him it was bothering her, what he was saying. They apparently had a phone conversation, which he continued to text her about afterwards, saying, I wasn't attacking you. I was trying to understand your logic. You weren't trying to understand, the Republican responded. You were talking about hoping Jennifer Gilbert's, that's the speaker's wife's, children would die. Yes, Jones said, I've told you this before. Only when people feel pain personally do they move on policy. I point blank asked you more than 3 times, and you dug in that you meant it. I honestly am questioning a lot today. I mean, do I think Todd and Jennifer are evil, Jones responded, and that they're breeding little fascists? Yes. Here's what Jones had to say to a local reporter who he sat down with in the wake of these text messages coming out. And I want to point out, there was no effort to claim that these were not his words or that these were some way created or thought up. From the get-go, he admitted it, and other Democrats seemed to react the same way. There was no indication of surprise, which I don't know about you, but that tells me something about his reputation among those ranks. Here's his reaction.
Tyler, thank you for having me and for giving me the opportunity to apologize. And I sincerely and from the bottom of my heart want to express my remorse and my regret for what happened and what I said. That language has no place in our discourse, and I am so remorseful for what happened. I actually reached out to Speaker Gilbert this afternoon to apologize to him and to Jennifer and to their children, because I know that they are angry and furious, and they are well within all of their bounds to feel that way, because what I said was unacceptable, and I accept responsibility for that. And I want them to know, and I want the people of Virginia to know that I am so deeply, deeply embarrassed, and that I understand the gravity of what I said, and I am so apologetic for it from the bottom of my heart.
You can take him at his word. From my perspective, that seems to be a pretty soft apology for the extremism of what he said. And Democrats are en masse, as they did with Ralph Northam when he was caught on the blackface scandal, in the wake, by the way, of saying things that were even worse than blackface about letting young babies die on the radio. You see this kind of en masse support and basically saying this is something that, we just believe, he can rise above it or something like that. Except it's not ancient history. We're not talking about some overheated college student. We're talking about a political a person who was in the actual position that they were in right before running for attorney general and statewide office. The current governor, Glenn Youngkin, who cannot run for re-election because of Virginia's bizarre, rule against having someone who's able to run out of an incumbent position for that role, had this to say when he joined Fox.
We had Charlie Kirk assassinated, and so many folks celebrated in the far left. We've had two Democrats threaten to murder two of our delegates running for office in Virginia. And now Jay Jones comes out and says that he has 2 bullets for Todd Gilbert's head and wants to see his children die. I mean, this is unbelievable. And what's shocking also is that after calling for the normal apology, the Democrat candidates, Abigail Spanberger and the rest of them, were out campaigning this weekend like it was nothing. They have got to call for this guy to resign, step down, get out of this race in disgrace, because this is beyond disqualifying.
I think this is beyond disqualifying for anybody, Republican or Democrat, to be the attorney general of any state. I don't know why you would vote for someone who thinks that their political opponents actually deserve to be shot, that they hope for their children to die so that they feel pain, that they think of them as raising little fascists. And until I hear otherwise from any Democrat candidate running in Virginia who has endorsed Jay Jones, I'm going to assume that they think what he thinks too. I don't know that you should give them any benefit of the doubt at this point. We've seen the celebrations. We've read what you've said. We've read what your supporters have said. We've read what you continue to say, not just about this president, but about every single one of his supporters too, that you call them fascists, you call them Nazis. You say that you hope that they deserve pain. You say that you hope that they actually feel some kind of negative ramifications because you want them to change, but most of all, you want them to just disappear. You want them to go away. You want them, in many instances, to unalive themselves, or if they won't do it themselves, then, as Jay Jones says, he's happy to do it for you, metaphorically at least. This man is running to be the Attorney General of Virginia. He thinks that Republicans raise little fascists, and he thinks that he can be the Attorney General for all Virginians. This isn't the Virginia way. This isn't anything close to what a democratic republic ought to be. In the kind of atmosphere that we have today in our politics, the words that Jay Jones had to say cannot be dismissed as unserious. And that's the real problem here. What he actually believes. He's not apologizing because he thinks he said anything that's wrong. He's apologizing because he got caught saying it, and because it puts his campaign, and by extension, the campaign of other statewide Democrats, including Abigail Spanberger, at risk at this very late juncture. One last word on this. There are 45 days of early voting in Virginia. This is an indictment of early voting. If you are not traveling, if you aren't doing, any kind of, ballot from overseas or something like that, you should not be able to early vote. Certainly not to a degree of 45 days. That's insane. A story like this is coming in at a point where perhaps even a tenth of the electorate has already voted. There are people openly posting that they wish they had not voted for him or that they had left him off his ballot. Would that have changed the result of the election? We'll have to see how close it is come November. But I still think this is an indictment of anybody who has endorsed Jay Jones, who stays with that endorsement at this point. I don't believe him when he says he's sorry. He'll have to prove otherwise. I'm Ben Domenech. You're listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. We have a great show today with a conversation with Maria Bartiromo and with investigative journalist Luke Rosiak. We'll have more coming up next. Happy to be joined now on The Big Ben Show by the great Maria Bartiromo. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me.
Hey, Ben. Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you a bunch of questions about the state of the economy and what you're seeing going on. But I actually wanted to start by asking you, what is it like to get up every morning and start the day having to be on?
Yeah.
Because this industry, there's not a lot of people who can do that and do that as consistently as you can. How do you stick to that routine and deliver the kind of high quality broadcast that your viewers are expecting every morning?
Thank you so much. Well, you know what? I try to go to bed early. It's really important because 3:45 a.m. comes really fast. I get in bed by 8:30. Okay. It's not that early, but I try to. And I don't always fall asleep at 8:30. So sometimes I will just get 4 hours sleep. I mean, it's the truth because I get up every morning at 3:45 to get ready for the show, which starts at 6 a.m. We're live 6 to 9 in the morning. Look, I love my schedule. I've always been a morning person. A couple of times in my career, I've done evening shows, but then I went back to the morning. I like the idea to be done early in the morning so that I have the rest of the day in case I need it to work out, to go biking, to make calls, to do whatever I want, to take a nap. So I'm okay with it. I'm used to it at this point. But it is what it is. The show must go on. So if I'm in a bad mood, if I had a tough night, if I'm mad at somebody, it doesn't matter. I've got to be there for my audience.
So how much caffeine between 3:45 and the beginning of the show do you consume on average?
Well, I have certainly about 2 cups of coffee every day during the show, but it might be more by the time the show is over. 3 cups. I don't usually go more than that because I'll pound water between them, just to have something. Sometimes hot water with honey and lemon is good too, just to have a hot drink. But so I don't need the caffeine to do it. You obviously mentioned that you are a morning person. Not everybody who does your show, though, is a morning person. You're right.
What are the key signs that, like, this is a good fit because they're morning people and this is not a good fit because it's going to be slow when they come on?
Well, look, a good fit is someone who knows the issues and has a capability to talk about the issues. We're talking about business, policy, politics, water cooler stuff. It's a morning show, so we're trying to cover everything. So we've got a lot of people who know that they can't get up early every day, but they want to be on. Look, the show's rocking. I mean, we're beating our number one competitor, Squawk Box, on CNBC, which is a show that I launched back in the day, having spent 20 years at CNBC before coming to Fox. So, things are going really well with the show. So we have a lot of interest in guests being on the show. So you have to deal, just given the nature of your slot, with a ton of breaking news that you don't necessarily have prep for, in advance. Some things, obviously, you can anticipate. Do you have a pattern or an expectation in terms of how you work with your team to handle things like that just come over the wire right as you're starting the show or right after? Yeah, I mean, we try to plan for it. I mean, certainly economic data we're ready for. We know the expectations of the data today. We had data out and we knew what to expect. And when it was wildly off of the expectations, we thought, okay, this is a big story. So, there are certain areas that I know well and that I've studied a lot. I've studied a lot about the major banks. I've studied a lot about AI and technology. But then there are other things that I know nothing about that I need to study and be a quick study fast, or book the right guests around me who actually know the subject and can add intelligent things to it. And that's what I try to do, just bring on people who understand these issues even better than I may, and try to have a conversation about it. You mentioned AI. Navigating that world and understanding it is something that so many people are
trying to catch up on at this point. There were folks who were ahead of the curve in terms of paying attention to it, but others, a lot of Americans. And it's one of those things where even though I'm not someone who talks a lot about AI, I get asked about it at speaking events almost every time. Someone will ask a question related to it. And a lot of it has to do with the future and careers of their children, just given the demographic of people who come to those kinds of things. What do you say to people about the level of concern they should have about preparing their kids, people who are going to be graduating college the next couple of years, that kind of thing, going to the workforce, for a new dynamic that not a lot of people anticipated even a few years ago?
Well, I think that there is reason to be concerned. I mean, I think we are at a pivot right now. This is sort of like an iPhone moment or a .com moment. I was covering business at CNBC when I reported on, Google going public and Amazon going public. This was the birth of .com. And we were all worried about the same thing. I think when you do have a technology that replaces the way we work, you are going to see job losses. So I think it is important to have a plan for new jobs that will be created, and have a plan just in case you do get your job eliminated because of AI. Because I think that given the efficiencies as a result of artificial intelligence, we will see jobs go away. But we thought that with .com as well, and we didn't really know how many engineers we needed, how many coders we needed. So I think it's really important to arm yourself with the right information about the future and about the new opportunities to come, and try to be comfortable with new technology so that you can allow yourself to be somewhat resilient in terms of learning new things. But, I don't think there's any doubt that AI is going to change the way we work and replace certain jobs. But there will be many jobs that come as a result of AI. I happened to run into Kai-Fu Lee the other day, and he's really known as the father of AI. He's written many books on it. And I said to him, how are you? Where are you? He said, I'm in Beijing. And I thought, oh, okay, now he's in Beijing. For a while, he was in I don't know, I think it was Shanghai or Singapore. But I said to him, so how is China using AI differently than America? And he said something so interesting to me. He said, well, right now, America is using AI for information largely. We go into our AI, whatever it is, Chat GPT, or even Google sends you to their AI assistant, and you get information. You might cut and paste a letter, make this letter better. But in China, they're using it differently. He said, I will get in touch with my AI assistant and tell my AI assistant, get my house cleaned, pay my bills, and buy my wife a birthday present. And I said, wow, well, how does your AI assistant do all of that? He said, well, it's connected to my bank account. They're going to get the house cleaned. They're going to pay my bills, which is a risk. You've got, it's connected to my bank account, but that's the way I want it. And they know that last year I bought my wife a necklace, so maybe she'll want the matching earrings, and they'll get it all done.
I would very much like to use AI to avoid going to the DMV.
Yeah, that's right.
So one question I have about that, though, is the obvious regulatory pushback that we're seeing from government. And there have been a number of different proposals. This most recent one from Senators Hawley and Durbin, for instance, would be about allowing people to sue companies if their AI leads to harm to individuals and that sort of thing. The question that I have about that is there a principle about where the government should go in that vein? And do we need to have any restrictions on the government's own use of AI in terms of concerns that I've heard from conservative people across the country? One of the things that sometimes comes up is I'm worried that they're going to deploy AI via the IRS or something like that to come after people that they don't like, kind of a supercharged version of the Tea Party targeting that we saw back years ago. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that there are always reasons to be concerned and skeptical about new technologies. And I also think that when you consider the algorithm, that just doesn't happen by coincidence. Someone is programming the algorithm. So you could have political bias and you could have mistakes. And I think you always have to realize that and recognize that. You should never look at anything, AI or anything else, as religion. You have to take it with a grain of salt and say, okay, did I look at other options? Did I look at other sources to ensure that this, in fact, is the answer that I'm looking for? Because I've used AI and I have noticed that there is some political bias there. And so, I think it's really important to understand that this is not the end all. You actually have to ensure that you feel like you're getting lots of different opinions, and then you can make your own opinion. In terms of the regulatory backdrop, are you talking about Section 230?
So it's kind of an adjacent thing that they've just proposed. It's a piece of legislation that Durbin and Hawley basically compared to, if a toy car breaks and harms your kid, that you should be able to sue them. It wants to treat it like a product, essentially, in terms of their proposal. I haven't read the legislation. They just put a press release out yesterday, but it's just one more thing that's an example of that.
Well, I don't know about a product, but I know that today, when you're looking at social media,
yes,
an increasing number of people are getting their news from social media.
Yes.
So if you're getting your news from social media like TikTok or, Facebook, if that's where you're getting your news, then I don't see anything wrong with those companies being liable for what's on those platforms, the way the news organizations like Fox News is liable for what's on its air.
Well, you raised something that's really interesting about that. In fact, you may have seen these numbers, but the Pew survey that came out at the end of last year that looked at where people got their news, the majority now of news consumption, and it's barely a majority, but the majority now of news consumption comes from social media versus actual media entities.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first started covering social media, when I mentioned to you in the go-go 90s, I'll call it, when .com was going public and, anybody with a .com after its name was seeing its stock soar, that was an idea that people felt that these companies were quote unquote bulletin boards, that you're just putting stuff on the bulletin board and you could put yay, nay, you could put all different opinions on the bulletin board. Today, that's much different. Today, these companies have grown to become enormous companies and enormous generators of information and news. So if a company or a person is getting the news from social media the way that they would have gotten their news from ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox News in the past, then I think all of that liability should be equated across all of these companies. I have no problem with having these companies be liable for their information that they're putting out.
Put on your political analysis hat for a moment, if you'll indulge me. In the last 10 years or so, we saw the Democrat media machine basically dictate the outcomes of presidential primaries consistently. There was no question it was going to be Hillary in 2016. Bernie didn't have a shot. In 2020, they massed together basically to put Biden in the position that he was. You saw everybody drop out in South Carolina. In 2024, obviously, they engineer this Kamala Harris situation. And that was all something that was fueled in part by these major media entities, many of which you just mentioned, that all kind of lined up and said this is the way to go. What we have here in New York right now is the opposite of that. The New York Times warned against Zohran Mamdani being on anybody's ballot. The Atlantic talked about how, he's problematic for all these different reasons and his plans won't work. The general bias of the established kind of entities was against him, and yet you saw him fueled by social media to get to the point that he's at right now. Do you think that the Democratic establishment is at a point where they are losing the kind of control that they've had over their far left flank?
I do. I think that the Democrats are losing their control. And the reason is because people have been let down.
Yeah.
And, people have figured out that the policies are not working for them. And I do think that today people are much smarter than the Democrats give them credit. I grew up in an environment of pushing back against the man, right? Push back against the man. That's what I did when I was on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange for so many years. They didn't want me there. The traders didn't want me there. I had to push back. And I also found myself pushing back against the establishment when I got to Fox, because I tripped over this story that Russia collusion was a lie, and I knew who to trust, and I was right, and I had gotten slammed for it online and in social media because I wasn't going along with the narrative. What I have found is that the people often know better. And during all of that pushback, I always used to remember people who would say to me, look, this is not for you. We know how to do this. You don't. We'll tell you the end. You can't know this, but you can know that. You know what? I'm done with it. And viewers are done with it as well, because they recognize that these policies are not working for them. So I think the Democrats are, in fact, losing the ability to control the narrative and the ability to create the herds to go in one place or another.
Much of the motivation here, whether it's really this or not, has been traced back to the Occupy Wall Street movement. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal, I don't know if you saw it, about these all the different people who came out of Occupy who now are working for Mamdani or were part of the kind of volunteer operation that he has. I don't know how real that is. I think they're pegging it to something that not a lot of them were actually a part of. But even setting that aside, are you concerned that one of the major parties in America today is now drifting in a direction that is explicitly anti-capitalism, explicitly anti-business, and even if they're taking donations from billionaires, has a group of people who basically say, we don't think billionaires should exist, and eat the rich movement?
Absolutely. And I think it started with Obama. I think, President Obama was very much rich versus poor, white versus black, women versus men, transgender versus not, homosexual versus heterosexual. It was all everybody had to be in a category. And I think that that's only gotten worse. So, look, today on Mornings with Maria, we had on John Catsimatidis, and he's got a big stake in everything. He owns Gristedes, D'Agostino grocery stores. He's about to see government-run grocery stores. And, he's against Mamdani. But I think right now you have to look at the electorate in New York. I mean, it's a very small electorate that came out and voted in Bill de Blasio. Yeah. It's a very small electorate who comes out and vote, and they are very, very liberal. So I don't know if it will be a broader portfolio of people who come out this time so that they can try and stop Mamdani. But at this point, it looks like he's going to win, and New York will be socialist.
I mean, that's a frightening concept.
It's frightening.
I mean, it's one of these things where it's one thing to sort of point and laugh at the inefficiencies and problems of like San Francisco governance, but this is New York City. There's enormous import to who's in charge here and who's in that mayoral spot. Do you think that ultimately this is going to play out the way that Washington Republicans seem to think, that this is going to be an object lesson for the nation in terms of the downsides of the left? Or is there more of a risk that this kind of thing catches on and becomes, a force that is not just a fringe within one of the parties, but is actually the one, driving the ship, determining where they go?
Well, it's not the only race that we're talking about a socialist, right? I mean, there's also, is it Michigan? I mean, I know that there's another one happening. And then, if Zoran Mamdani does get in, he'll bring in others. So, look, AOC and Bernie Sanders are running this charade. And I just think that, we've seen this play out before. Socialism does not work. Capitalism does work. And so it's unfortunate that so many young people, aren't really clear on what socialism is. And then there's also this idea that, there could be foreign money behind him, or that's what John Catsimatidis said today. And Andrew Cuomo said, they bust in all these people who weren't in New York, but then they lived there for 30 days. And if you live there for 30 days, you can actually vote. I mean, so there's some questions about who, in fact, is supporting this. Yes. I don't know.
It's interesting to me to see this playing out at this particular moment, because one of the problems that Democrats had for so long was kind of the aging of their leadership. Their party leaders, getting so much older and not really stepping aside. And now it seems like that is coming to bite them at a particular moment, not just with the Biden problems, but with everybody else kind of down the line, that as they age out, if they're getting replaced by people who are, inexperienced or outside of government, can basically argue that they have no connection to any of the policies of the past, and it puts them in an advantageous position. But I think once they get into power, I mean, the thing that concerns me about Mamdani is less the city-run groceries, which will be a failure, and more the lack of cops on the subways.
Yeah, no cops on the subway. He said many times he wanted to defund the police, even though he's trying to walk away from that now. I also worry about, I don't know, the culture of Muslim law versus others. Sharia. I mean, look at what happened to London. Yeah, you go to London right now, you feel like you're in Saudi Arabia.
When the Unite the Kingdom protest happened, I did notice somebody tweeted out a joke. As you can see, they're flying the Union Jack, replacing the tradition of Palestinian flags. So it is kind of funny, but it is also very true that it's just
scary.
Like this. Yeah, it's scary. I want to shift to talking a little bit about how people should learn about money and markets. I have young daughters and a son on the way, and I would like to start to teach them about money and the value of a dollar early. And it's not just to prevent them from being spoiled, but it's because I learned about that when I was young too. In a incident that my family still discusses, we moved into a house that had a big, gross black walnut tree, and it would drop these, chunky black walnuts in the backyard. And my father, who got tired of running over them with his lawnmower, told my sister and I that he would pay us a nickel for every one of them that we picked up and put into buckets. We went after it hammer and tongs, and we eventually got enough money from that to buy a Super Nintendo. And so he regretted. He was like, "I should have given you a penny. It shouldn't have been a nickel." I want to have my kids have experiences like that teach them about, the value of saving money, especially for a goal or something along those lines. What is some advice or counsel that you would give to parents about how to teach their kids that kind of thing?
Well, I think you're right to start at home, because it does start at home. And I also learned it at home. I mean, I grew up in a middle-class family in Brooklyn where my dad owned a restaurant. My mom worked. I always watched my parents work. And that was a lesson in and of itself, knowing that my parents were working for a goal. And my mom, from a very young age, always told me to try to be financially independent. She always told me you never want to rely on someone else. And she did this from a very young age. I remember when I was 5 years old, and Mr. Softy would come down the block, the ice cream truck, and I would say, "Oh, Mom, Mr. Softy's outside. Can I go get a cone?" And she would always say the same thing. She would say, "Oh, sure, Maria, you can have a cone, but how will you pay for it?" And I would say, "Oh, I don't know." She said, "Well, you're going to have to start collecting change. And every time you get any money, you put your money in the change, you start saving." Oh, okay. So then I started collecting change, my nickels, my dimes, my quarters, so that when the ice cream man came down the block, I would say, "Mom, I want to get a cone. I have 90 cents. I have $1. And that's how I started understanding if you save, you will save enough to actually get what you want. And I think, over my life, my mom always did little things like that. So I remember when I was younger, my mom would open, the three of us, my sister and brother and myself, what she called Christmas clubs. I don't know if you knew what a Christmas club is.
No.
So it was a bank account that she would open just for the year leading up to Christmas. And every 2 weeks when she got paid, she would put a little something in each of our Christmas clubs. And then at the end of the year, toward the end of November, she would give us a check for like $1,000. And we would be able to use that $1,000 to buy gifts for everybody. And it was a whole year of me watching my mom put money in my Christmas club, and that was her gift to us. And I always knew, okay, you have the Christmas club. Oh, my Christmas club's up to this now. My Christmas club's up to that now. It was always this lesson of save, and if you want to save and you save your money, you can do what you want to do. And I learned that throughout my life, and it starts at home, and it must start at home. So I would, I would encourage all parents to make these, little exercises for children so that they do understand the value of $1. My sister would always do for her kids 3 buckets, and whatever monetary gift they would get, if they lost a tooth for the tooth fairy, or if they graduated, she would tell them that whatever money they got, they have to split it 3 ways. Number 1, the first part goes in savings. The second part they can have, that's their money, you can do whatever they want with that money. And number 3, they have to put it in another account where we're going to give it away and have it for philanthropy. You had 3 buckets. So all through life, her kids knew that whatever money they got, a third goes to savings, a third goes to philanthropy, and a third they can have. And it's just a great lesson.
Yeah, I love that idea. I definitely will adopt one of those and talk to my wife about it. But the other thing that I think is really important about it is, it also, I think, is designed to make the kids think a little bit differently about when they request things, because at least in my household, obviously, and we've been fortunate, it's one of those things where when they ask for something, they get it, or, there's not a, oh, well, we can't get that this time, or you can only have one toy. And so I'm always trying to tell my wife, don't spoil them. But I think that this will help with that too. If they have to make a determination, do you get this thing or do you get that thing?
Well, it's also a good way to teach them about tax cuts, right? I mean, maybe you want to say, okay, you got this money. I'm going to play government, and I'm going to take 36% of your money right now, and now this is your money because you had to give 36% to taxes because you're in the highest tax bracket. I mean, little things like this will ensure that they understand the impact of policy as well.
How do you think Trump is doing?
I think Trump is doing very well. I mean, I think President Trump was ready for this term. He had a lot of plans going into it. As soon as he walked into the Oval Office, he had lots of executive orders. I think he has a very clear picture of what he wants the economy and America to look like when he's done. And I think he wants it to be largely driven by the private sector, private enterprise. And I think that's why he's coming up with new ideas in terms of helping to get money invested in the country. The other thing is that he's looking at things through a national security lens. And for me, I think that's very important. And I'm happy about that because the world has changed. China is on the march, Russia is on the march, Iran is on the march. We've got a lot of adversaries out there. And so it's very important, I believe, to look at things in a national security realm. And that's what he's doing.
The attitude that this administration has had in terms of leaning into things and doing so many things very quickly, moving very fast in a lot of different ways, has put people in a mood that is on edge a little bit about perhaps seeing things in the economy that are concerning to them. In terms of the poll data that we have, the support that the president has lost among people who voted for him in the most recent election seems to largely come from middle-class voters, Latino voters in particular, but people who basically feel like the economy should be looking better for them. And by that, when you drill into it, it's basically just prices are too high, that they expected them to come down. It was always my concern. In fact, I said this on Fox on Inauguration Day. I said my number one concern is that people would expect the economy to move far faster than it would, because it was my feeling at the time, and I think it's been borne out since, that things were much worse under the Biden administration than people actually cottoned on to at the time. That the economic situation was actually much worse than maybe people in D.C. and in politics seem to realize. What do you think about that? How do you affect those voters who are concerned about these things that the president doesn't really have direct control over, but obviously it's an expectation matchup, that they thought basically returning Trump to the White House means we're going to undo all of this stuff that happened under Biden that made all these costs go up for me and my family?
Well, I mean, look, I think what we've learned from the Biden administration and the Trump administration is that policy matters. And, it's not so easy to get inflation down from 40-year highs. Under Biden, the CPI, Consumer Price Index, went all the way up 9.1%. And President Trump has been able to rein in inflation and get it way down in 6 or 8 months. So I think that's something to say. And I think part of it has to do with his policy around deregulation and energy. If you're tapping into the energy capacity of America and you're putting more oil and gas on the market, then obviously supply and demand is going to send prices lower. And that was one of the underlying issues for Biden. Oil prices were high because he wanted to do everything but oil and gas production. And so, Trump has done the opposite. He's been able to get oil prices lower. You're right. It's a lot that he's thrown at people in 8 months. And, it can appear chaotic because he's throwing a lot of stuff on the field. I think part of it is that he's doing that intentionally because he's trying to get as much done as possible. He knows he only has 4 years. He knows that he's got 2 years before he actually could lose the majority. Yeah. So he's trying to get as much as done as he can. But I think, the policies that he's been focusing on is affordability and getting prices down. There's more to do, I think. But, you remember you also had other issues around like the price of eggs because there was a shortage of the chickens. And so there are specific stories related to that, to inflation. But yes, affordability is the number one issue. And it's really all about how the people feel.
One of the things that has been a big difference in this administration compared to the last one is how close the president has come to a lot of the big figures in the tech world. Obviously, beyond kind of just them showing up for occasional events, he seems to pay a lot more attention to them, and they obviously, many of them either supported him or seemed to be, much more comfortable with him back in office. What's your perception of the president's attitude towards these big tech CEOs? And are they exercising too much influence over the direction of policy in this administration, or do you think that it's actually a pretty good thing to have them, on the inside, essentially talking to him far more frequently than they did during the first term?
Well, first, let's say that Silicon Valley is a changed place right now. Now, everybody in Silicon Valley wants to wrap themselves up in the American flag.
Yes.
And that was not the case in the last administration at all. It was all like, oh, we're globalists and, we love the world. And now, they are taking on the America First policy. And that's a good thing, to be proud of America and to know that your actions are impacting the very place that enabled you to become rich and become powerful. Look, is it too much? I think President Trump is following the money. He knows that these guys have a lot of money and have the opportunity and the ability to move markets and also to affect change. And so I don't think it's too much. I'm comfortable with it. I mean, look, I don't think anybody is going to out-Trump Trump. I mean, I think, President Trump understands that, his position is the most important, most powerful in the world, and I don't think he's going to allow the tech guys to overtake it. But I also think he understands that their product affects a lot of people, and he, again, as I mentioned earlier, is looking at the national security issues.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about national security and semiconductor chips, then you're talking about a very serious issue. And he's trying to get supply chains into America so that America is not reliant on overseas to produce some of the things like semiconductor chips that are so critical to the military.
I and a lot of other people are concerned on the national security front with the situation regarding TikTok. And obviously that was one where, the tech industry had strong opinions in different directions on some of that. Are you comfortable with this deal that they have announced and put out there as being something that, essentially can split the difference? Or is it one where there are still going to be concerns that China is kind of, essentially licensing the algorithm, or as opposed to really releasing it in the same way that a lot of critics had hoped that it would be?
I don't know, Ben. I don't have an answer for you. I just don't know. I mean, I most people know, am very skeptical of the Chinese Communist Party.
Yes.
This is not about the Chinese people. This is about the Chinese Communist Party and the leadership of China. They've been undermining America for decades, beginning with stealing intellectual property, abusing the visa system, surveillance on a massive scale of America, hovering over our military installations. The list is long. COVID, the list is very long in terms of what Communist China has tried to do to America. So I'm skeptical. I do not want them to surveil Americans and have access to our data. President Trump says that ByteDance, while owning 20% of this new entity, will not have access to the algorithm. So I trust it because that's what the president said. I assume he and Oracle and the other partners have looked at this and ensured that China will not have the access that it has had. But I don't know. I'll have to wait and watch and see how this plays out.
As someone who's had as storied of a media career as you have had, what are your thoughts on some of this recent activity in the media landscape, these mergers that are happening, the way that all these properties are being evaluated and valued in this moment? And particularly, you mentioned Oracle, this David Ellison kind of buying spree or something along those lines that it looks like he's on. What's your assessment of what's going on in the media landscape on the corporate side right now?
Well, the media has been way too liberal and way too one-sided. I mean, clearly, they got in line with the Democrats against President Trump for years and against the American people. I mean, we all know what happened with the Twitter files. And, it does not make me happy to know what Elon Musk told us, that there were 1,000 people in different agencies throughout government who were actually bullying social media executives executives to take down posts and to cancel conservatives. So all of this, outrage about Jimmy Kimmel and all this other stuff, impacting freedom of speech. Well, cry me a river, okay? Because I was there, and I remember what happened during the Biden years when, God forbid, you said anything that, oh God, I think I have a side effect from the vaccine, you were canceled. And, so I think that, it's really important to uphold our free speech and uphold the values that we deem so near and our Constitution. And so I don't like what has happened with the media. I'm happy to see a little more balance. What David Ellison, I think, is trying to do is do more balanced, moderate conversation. The way Fox News has had to be fair and balanced, and when Fox News first came out with Fair and Balanced, it was because nobody else was balanced. We had to come out with the conservative side of view to balance it out. That's what fair and balanced meant, to fair and balance the entire media landscape. So I'm happy that now we've got some backup coming, I think.
Well, we'll obviously be paying attention to it. I do think that it's just funny how much these institutions, I think, overvalued their importance in terms of the conversation, and from my perspective, became increasingly out of touch. And I feel this way about Fox, and it's not just blowing smoke to say the average Fox is more in touch. But the just by being slightly more aware of what's going on in the lives of the average American, compared to what you see from these other networks and the like, you start to become aware of how much there's the stories that they emphasize, the way that they talk about things. It's divorced from the reality that most Americans have. And just with the Comey indictment, looking back at every single time that they said, this is the beginning of the end for Donald Trump, or the walls are closing in, or all of these other things that they've said over the years. And it's just a litany. And it's like, at some point, these people are professionals. You know them, you've worked around them. They've been, some of them have been colleagues. Why do you think they just got that way, so out of touch with what the actual reality of the situation is in America? I don't know. I think there were a few extremes that were the loudest voices in the room, basically. And people, they get scared when you yell at them. You're constantly yelling at people, calling you a Nazi and a fascist, and canceling you and attacking you on social media. Oftentimes that you shut up, I don't want to fight. I don't want to put up with this. So you go away. And I think the few and the extreme few have become the loudest in the room. And as a result, they've bullied people to shut up. And I think increasingly today, after having gone through all of that, people are smarter and they're not going away. They're recognizing that, these policies do not do anything for my life and my family's life. Think about it. What were we doing having a wide open border? Yeah. Why would we have a border and not vet people, unvetted? Why would we have 232 people who were on the terrorist watch list? And how about all of the people who we didn't check and who got away? So I think people recognize that they don't want this crime in their cities. They want to just have security. They want to feel security on their home personal level, and they want to feel security on a national level. Well, I can tell you specifically the experience in D.C. based on, the most recent 2 months, I guess, essentially of the presence of the National Guard and of the steps that the president took. People on the ground there, the way that it was being covered on national media sources and by places like The Atlantic and CNN and things like that, that was both. It was funny because they would both mock it as being unnecessary and ridiculous, and then they would also say that it was a sign of jackbooted fascism. Like, it was like, pick one, guys. But the effect of that is a massive drop in carjackings in very short order. The D.C. mayor, Muriel Bowser, who is very, much on the left, has not fought back against it in any significant way. The D.C. council hates it, but they're crazy left. But the reason being, she's been operating 1,000 cops short, basically since the end of the pandemic, from where the city is supposed to be. And that is something that has a definite benefit for the citizenry. And to me, it's just one of, a million different examples you can pick where here's a problem where if you talk to people who are in these neighborhoods, if you walk through Union Station, if you go through areas that you used to feel uncomfortable, taking kids through there, I feel like I can take them back to museum areas now that I haven't taken them to, and that kind of thing. It's a complete different experience than what you hear from the national media. Are they ever going to wake up from this, or is this just they're so far dug in that they're never going to really, check their own selves and ask, am I wrong about this?
Well, I don't think they're going to ask the question while Trump is in office. I mean, I think there really is Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, they don't want an outsider being in there.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, though, that, we see this, strange new respect, it always happens. Can't you see that article going up in the New Yorker 5 years from now? I mean, in retrospect, Trump was better than J.D. Vance.
Yeah,
that's isn't that going to be the way that they do it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing.
They rehabbed George W. Bush overnight.
I think when all is said and done, years in the future, Trump will have a very good legacy.
Mm-hmm. Last question for you before we go, and thank you so much for sitting down with me. For the young people who are getting into media right now, first off, I never advise people to get into this industry because of what it does to you. But when I'm speaking to the YAF kids or something like that, there's always questions about how to get to certain places. What advice would you give right now for the 21-year-old who wants to be Maria Bartiromo in 15 years?
Well, I mean, look, my journey included working for free internships. I think it's really important to get an internship somewhere. And, I worked at CNN, did not get paid for a year. And, I learned a lot. So it really helped me. But I always give young people the same advice. Number one, work hard. There are no shortcuts. It doesn't matter who you know, who your parents know, who your grandparents know. There will be nothing ever to replace what someone sees in you as eagerness and hard work ethic. So hard work is essential, number one. I worked all shifts all the time, and I'm known as the hardest working person in my business forever, including today, by the way. Number two, love what you do. Make sure you try everything and you find out what you're good at and what you love. I mean, like, I love to sing. I'll never be a singer. It's not what I'm good at, and I know that, and I'm okay with that. I hit on something that I loved in terms of interviewing people and researching things early in my career, and I knew I want to be a journalist. So find out what you do, love what you do, and then if you love what you do, it won't be a problem working really hard. Maybe you'll be in the right place at the right time to get that great position that you're looking for. And number three, I think it's really important. I always tell graduates this, and 21-year-olds is a really important point. Is number three is always do the right thing. Because in your career, in your life, you will be thrown dilemmas, and you need to make the commitment today. When I'm thrown that dilemma, when I'm thrown that curveball, I'm going to answer it. I'm going to throw it back by doing the right thing. And we all know when faced with a dilemma, this is the right path and this is the wrong path. So make the commitment today, because no matter where you go in this life, no matter what geography you're in, no matter what industry you're in, one thing will always follow you, and that is your reputation. So protect it and cherish it. Those are my three pieces of advice.
Maria Bartiromo, thank you so much for joining The Big Ben Show.
Great to be with you.
We are back on The Big Ben Show. I am happy to welcome here today one of the best investigative reporters in the business, somebody who really latches onto stories and digs into them. Luke Rosiak, you can follow him on X at Luke Rosiak. That's Rosiak. He is an investigative journalist at the Daily Wire, where you can read his coverage. He's been somebody who's been paying attention to a lot of the different stories that other news stations and including our own find out about after Luke has actually reported about it in the first place, which is something that I hope that he's proud of, because it definitely leads to a lot of digging from a lot of folks who don't know about things that are taking place before Luke starts talking about it. And that instance happened this past week with a hearing that I had not heard any kind of real movement about prior to Luke starting to post about it. Luke, tell us a little bit about the issue that you were covering there, the courtroom and everything else that was going on as it related to the attempted assassination of Justice Kavanaugh.
Hey, Ben, good to be with you, and thanks for all those kind words. So this was a guy that, if you remember back in 2022, was He flew from California with a gun and a bunch of weapons, and he was standing outside of the home of Brett Kavanaugh with the plan to kill him, and actually the plan to kill a couple more justices after that if he could get away with it. And ultimately, he called the police on himself and turned himself in. Fast forward to last Friday, and he's in court to be sentenced on charges of the attempt to assassinate a U.S. justice. And so the sentencing guidelines called for 30 years to life. That includes a terrorism enhancement. And the prosecutors asked for the same amount. They just wanted the judge to follow the sentencing guidelines. And so I went to court, and sentencing usually don't take too long. This one took 7 hours because Judge Deborah Boardman, who's a Joe Biden appointee to the Maryland Federal Court, she went with a 22-year downward departure from the sentencing guidelines and gave Nicholas Roski, who was by then a transgender woman going as Sophie Roski, she gave him/her just 8 years in prison, which is the minimum. That's what his lawyers wanted. I mean, there was no compromise here. She gave his defense lawyers everything they wanted.
You know, a couple of things. First off, I want to refresh people's memory because while you and I obviously paid attention to this story, like so many others, these violent attempts get really put aside by the media once they pass. And so people may have forgotten some of the details of this. You had the leak of the Dobbs opinion coming out, but keep in mind that opinion had not been agreed upon at the time that it was leaked. People did assume that it was accurate pretty quickly. The word got around that this was a close to end of stage draft of this decision by Justice Alito, obviously. And the internet blew up, and people, I think now have maybe forgotten that one of the things that happened was that the group Ruth Sent Us started to put out information about the locations of all the different justices. Now, they did this under the auspices of we would like you to go to their neighborhood and peacefully protest. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, because those things were not particularly limited, including at the time, and this is something that is really seared into my memory, the fact that they didn't just put out the locations of the justices, some of which, by the way, they got wrong. There were some images of people who showed up in the wrong neighborhoods. But they also put out the list of the different schools that Amy Coney Barrett's children went to, encouraging confrontations. This seemed ripe for some type of terrible thing to happen, and it almost did, namely in the form of this attempted assassin who, as you said, came across the country with, the kind of gear that one would expect for something like this. Could you walk us through just a little bit about what happened that ended up with that not taking place? There were some conversations that were happening or that he was having at the time that ultimately led him to turn himself in.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I forgot about some of those details with the school and everything. It was 3 days after the leak of the Dobbs decision that Nicholas Roski started posting online, you could see his plan starting to come into shape. And he's asking people on Reddit, like, if the composition of power on the Supreme Court was changed, how would that benefit? Like, could we make sure that Roe versus Wade wasn't overturned? Could we make sure that for decades to come, liberals had their way if the balance of power was changed by just one seat from 5 to 4 to 4 to 5? And people were telling him, like, yeah, that would make a difference for decades to come. And so that was his express intent, is to kill a Supreme Court justice with the intent of changing policy. At the same time, he actually talked about how his views on abortion were that everyone should be aborted. He wasn't pro-choice. He was pro-abortion. His view was that babies couldn't consent to being born. And since they couldn't consent, they should all just be aborted because life is suffering. So this is a troubled guy.
There's a whole strain of that, like, that has different names, but this sort of human eliminationist kind of category where it's like, no one should, humans themselves should not exist, that kind of thing. So yeah, but please continue.
Yeah, and at the same time, he's becoming transgender. You can see that in his posts online, which I don't know why a transgender person would need to be concerned about abortion, but for some reason he was. And he said that he was a furry, basically, the same as the boyfriend of the guy that killed Charlie Kirk. He said he wanted to wear nothing but a collar and have somebody walk him along like a dog. Just kind of a weird, perverted guy. He also said he's attracted to women. I mean, he's transgender, but he's like a transgender lesbian. He's not attracted to men. So he's a very troubled, strange dude, and he decides that he's going to alter the course of politics in the U.S. by killing a judge, one or more judges. So, he takes the trip to Dulles and to Chevy Chase, Maryland, and I guess he saw like some U.S. Marshals guarding the house when he got there. And he wound up kind of freaking out and calling his sister and then calling the police on himself. And so, definitely there was some justification for leniency in that he did turn himself in. There was some argument in court about whether he saw, maybe if the U.S. Marshals weren't there, he wouldn't have had that hesitation, and that maybe that triggered a moment of reflection. His lawyer said that's not really what it was. He just realized actually Kavanaugh is a human being and a normal person. So at the end of the day in court, there was definitely some of the focus was on the fact that he had turned himself in, but also quite a bit of the rhetoric, especially from Judge Deborah Boardman, was about the fact that he was transgender and how that should affect the sentence.
The decision to push forward with this narrative about the transing of this would-be assassin and the quote unquote journey or attempt of pursuing this. How much does it seem like that's a legitimate development, and how much was it something that the defense really leaned into, just given what we know about the judge in this case, namely that there's a case that is actually before the Supreme Court that is based on a decision that she made regarding the ability, the rights of parents to determine what schools are teaching their kids, particularly the books that they are using to teach their kids about transgender issues, among others, and where she took the side against the parents, basically saying that the school had the authority to expose their children to it, whether the parents liked it or not. Was this kind of an indication where if we really lean into this, we could perhaps get this leniency from this Joe Biden appointed judge?
That might have been a part of it for sure. I mean, he definitely referred to himself as transgender before it, but they planted the idea in the head of the judge, and the judge then kind of took the lead and very much ran with it. She said in court, that, quote, "I am heartened that this terrible infraction has helped the Roski family accept their daughter for who she is." So the judge, she didn't say she was glad that this terrorist attack on essentially her boss happened, but she said she was heartened by the fact that
it is up the chain. I hadn't even thought about that.
If there's a silver lining to this terrorist attack, it's that now his gender identity is accepted.
You gotta always look on the bright side, Luke.
That Nicholas Rosiak, his sister, was also gay, and she actually decided she was gay while she was in a mental institution. And when she got out of the mental institution and she told her parents she was gay, this is according to the judge. The sister Nicholas Rosiak saw that their parents struggled to reconcile the sister's sexuality with their religious beliefs. So she's saying that Nicholas Rosiak basically, the implication, I think, was that this might explain, or if not, maybe not justify or excuse, but this would explain why he committed a terrorist attack, because his mom was religious and didn't accept that her son was actually her daughter. And therefore, I mean, is it any surprise that he traveled across the country after planning for months and tried to kill a Supreme Court justice?
Well, certainly, I mean, in the history of families in America, he's the first person who struggled with acceptance of his sexuality from his parents. I mean, I'm sorry. It's such a laughable contention. The judge, though, seemed to be saying all this with a straight face. What was the reaction in the courtroom from the Kavanaugh family?
His mom was there and she was wearing sunglasses inside, I think, because, you can imagine she was maybe tearing up and she wanted to be private about that. And then his wife was there. And when the judge said that he was going to get only the minimum sentence, far below what sentencing guidelines called for, I mean, they immediately left the room. They never addressed the court. And so the whole thing was the emotional impact on the culprit. We heard from him, Nicholas Rosiak. We heard from his mom, his dad, his sister. And so there wasn't any hearing about the emotional impact on the Kavanaugh family. And it very much felt like the judge perceived that Nicholas Rosiak was the victim, not Judge Kavanaugh. And his mom, got up there and cried. And it was almost like a struggle session where she's trying to convince the judge that she now accepts the transgender identity. Because, I don't know if it's because that's what the judge wanted to hear or what, but she said, I've been attending PFLAG meetings and I learned about the LGBTQ community. I'm committed to going on this journey with Sophie. She was frustrated with what was going on in the world and we weren't a safe space to process it. I don't know why it's any of the judge's concern, whether the mom accepts that her son is actually her daughter. But the judge was very much kind of insisting on that. And it seemed to play an important role in the whole thing for some reason for Judge Boardman.
Mm-hmm. The initial rationale was something about where Rosiak would be imprisoned and the contention that there would be no safety in putting him into now she her into a male prison. That to me is something that has to be considered in the process as being a motivating factor for some of these people who make these claims, particularly after they are captured or after they surrender to the police. In this case, why did that have such a prevailing view that you would go from the 30-year mark to the 8-year mark? It just seems like such a dramatic shift in terms of the nature of what the Department of Justice, representatives were asking in this case versus what the case ended up with. And why, is this one of those things where even people who perhaps are not ideologically aligned with Justice Kavanaugh seem to be expressing actual shock at the shift in the level of sentencing?
I mean, that was definitely what the judge spent the most time on, as far as if you could argue that the implication of what she said, and I was in court for 7 hours, was if Donald Trump is going to make transgenders go to male prisons, then I'm not going to make the person who tried to kill Donald Trump's appointee go to prison at all, or barely at all. And she said, quote, the length doesn't need to be particularly long. Unduly harsh conditions make a difference too. Let's not hide the fact that President Trump issued an executive order saying transgender inmates would be assigned to prisons with their biological sex. So she is saying it would be a lot harder to be transgender in prison, and therefore you don't need to, the time counts for as much. It's more of a punishment. So she doesn't need to sentence this guy for very long. And she was kept saying Trump made this thing. And she accused the prosecutors of hiding it. She said, let's not hide it. And the prosecutor said, well, there is, this stuff was subject to an injunction. Like none of this stuff even exists right now. And so she eventually admitted at sentencing that the reasons why she was giving a lenient sentence to Nicholas Rosiak don't actually even exist. But she said, well, that could change if the injunction is overturned, and just the mere fact that Trump tried to implement some of these transgender policies indicates that there's no guarantees for Nicholas Rosiak. And so she said right now, I mean, basically, it wasn't just a lack of safety or anything. Keep in mind, this is a man who is attracted to females. So actually, it would be a risk to the females if he were in there.
Yeah.
And there's not, and I should say, I was 10 feet away from this dude. I mean, he was taller than me. He had a deeper voice than me. He did have long hair, but it was like tied back in a bun, and it wasn't feminine long hair. It just kind of looked like, like the Unabomber.
He's done basically nothing in terms of
and he spoke, and he
transition.
he didn't try to mimic the mannerisms of a woman. The judge was going on and on about Miss Roski, but it was funny. It was all the judge doing it. He didn't try to pretend to be a woman at all. I mean, he says he's one, but there's nothing he did as far as his behavior. But anyway, the judge was saying that the real reason it's going to be so hard for him that 8 years should count as 30 plus years is that he might not be able to get free estrogen hormones provided by the federal government. And then she admitted that apparently he will actually get that, even right now under Trump, because of an injunction. And I don't know if that's in a male prison or female prison, but apparently he can get the hormones. And so again, she was saying, well, that might change though. So I'm still, which really at that point, it seemed like, I wonder if this is trying to force Trump's hand and be like, you have to change this policy, or else I'm going to punish you by letting out all of these terrorists. And I think that's the issue here, is that not only, as you implied, can anyone pretend to be a transgender afterwards to get out of jail, but also all the ones who are actually trans, and we've seen quite a few of them, they're all going to be on the left. So if you don't have to serve anywhere near your full sentence just because you're transgender, that essentially gives a green light to left-wing domestic terrorism.
I mean, the overall takeaway that I would have, that I would assume would be logical for the insane Redditor would be, well, if I want to go down this road of attempting to assassinate, kidnap, not just Kavanaugh, but he talked of multiple other justices, and I fail, well, I can always turn myself in and end up with not even 10 years in the clink, and if I'm successful, I'm Luigi Mangione or something like that. It's a very dangerous precedent to set. With your overall attitude coming out of that courtroom, do you think that, and with their follow-up reporting since, obviously there have been public statements from the Department of Justice, from Pam Bondi, et cetera, that they're going to continue to go after this. What do you think is going to end up being the situation with this opinion? What comes next in terms of the way that they could fight this type of result from the Trump administration's perspective?
Well, Pam Bondi said she's going to appeal it, and I guess it would go to the Fourth Circuit then. And if it went up eventually to the Supreme Court, I guess Brett Kavanaugh would have to recuse himself. And so I don't know what happens then. But we have sentencing guidelines in this country to ensure consistency in sentencing, and make sure that there's fairness and that we're not all over the map here. And I think that one of the reasons that the sentencing took, well, so first of all, I should say, Judge Boardman went on at length about how the Supreme Court can't force her to follow sentencing guidelines. They used to be mandatory, and because of actions by the Supreme Court, now they're just advisory. So what are you going to do about it? We also have the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which I think creates these sentencing guidelines, including the terrorism enhancement. And she really questioned the legitimacy of the Sentencing Commission, and not its applicability in this case, but all of it. She said that the U.S. Sentencing Commission never showed her the evidence they used to create a terrorism enhancement. And the terrorism enhancement just means if you're doing a crime and you're doing it for the purposes of terrorism, you should go to jail for longer. And they did that as part of the 1994 crime reform bill. So I don't know why they would have showed her, Deborah Boardman, something that they did 30 years ago, and why, and what their thought process was. I mean, it seems fairly straightforward that terrorists should have a stricter, but she said, well, there's psychology research coming out of Georgetown University that says that terrorists can be rehabilitated. And I don't see what the justification is. I don't think they ever proved through evidence that it served a policy purpose to make terrorists spend more time in jail. So she wasn't just saying it doesn't apply to this case. She's really, even after we've seen the assassination of Charlie Kirk and all these other instances of political violence, she's very much explicitly minimizing the need to punish domestic terrorism. And even though this is important to serve as a deterrent effect to others. And so I think that's part of the reason why this is going to be appealed. But I also think one of the reasons that the hearing took 7 hours is Boardman was trying to give all the legal loopholes and all that to try to insulate herself during an appeal, because she may have known that this sentence was so shocking, a 22-year downward departure from the sentencing guidelines, that an appeal, which I think is unusual for the government to appeal a sentence, was probably inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, Luke, I will have to look into that Georgetown research. It strikes me as one of the problems with that assessment of rehabilitation is that a lot of the smarter terrorists are effectively neutralize their capability of participating in such a study, namely as a result of their profession. So I don't know how you compensate for that. Luke Rosiak is an investigative journalist for the Daily Wire. You can read his coverage there. I highly recommend it. He's done yeoman's work over the last several years covering Virginia area politics, particularly school board issues and the like, and you should follow him on X at Luke Rosiak. Luke, thanks so much for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show today.
Great talking with you, Ben.
Some final thoughts today on the Big Ben Show, a little more serious than what I normally deal with at the end. I want to say a few words about a pretty momentous event that's happened within the media landscape. I've been working in the media for quite a long time. I helped co-found Red State, one of the first conservative group blogs, all the way back in 2004. I co-founded The Federalist and ran it as publisher for nearly a decade. I've been in and around conservative media quite a bit. That's not the only media I've been around. In fact, I was at CBS for 4 years as a contributor and a regular on Face the Nation, which I quite enjoyed. John Dickerson, the host at the time, actually performed the marriage ceremony for my wife and myself, a family friend. And it's one of these things that was a very gratifying experience for me. At the same time, CBS is not, under any definition, a conservative place, nor was it a traditional values type of place, something that it had been perhaps in the past, occupying kind of a middle lane within American politics, and they didn't really strive for that type of balance while I was there. In fact, some of my best memories when it comes to the experiences I had at the CBS Bureau were of election night on 2016, when I got to do co-hosting, co-commentary duties, I should say, with Peggy Noonan and some other premier guests there, and got into it quite a bit with some of the more further left commentators in the evening, as you might expect. It's one of those experiences, though, that I value and taught me a lot about the media, and it was only afterwards that I was happy to join Fox. CBS is a place that really used to occupy trust within the media landscape to a great degree. Of course, we all know the stories of Murrow and Cronkite and all the different histories of the great reporting that they did over the years at 60 Minutes and places like that. We also know, though, of how much partisanship colored the past 25 years of their work, particularly Dan Rather and Rathergate, the false reporting about George W. Bush's National Guard record, and numerous other instances where they falsely or exaggerated reports in numerous areas that all seem to go in one direction ideologically. Most recently, as it relates to the interview that happened with Kamala Harris, where they were ultimately forced to reach a settlement with Donald Trump, just given how heavily they had edited her answers. The media business is a difficult business, and it's changing in a lot of ways, broadcast TV in particular. And CBS has found itself languishing in this moment. That's one of the reasons that it was available for purchase as part of this Paramount deal that David Ellison, the son of Trump supporting, and wealthiest man in the world, depending on the day, Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, to purchase it and to bring it into a growing media empire. Now he has put a new person in charge of it, in Barry Weiss, the co-founder, I should say, I guess, of the Free Press, a new publication that she went to after leaving the New York Times, having come up against and buffeted against numerous different issues inside the Times and at the editorial page, without being able to have the kind of authority to write what she wanted to write and to talk about what she wanted to talk about. She thought it would be better to work on the outside. Now she's going back into legacy media. We can say congratulations to Barry Weiss because she's a very successful person and she's built a lot of interesting things. She's featured a lot of interesting voices. I've been happy to contribute occasionally to the Free Press, and many of my friends and colleagues do as well. However, I do think that broadcast TV and TV news in general is a very difficult lane to get into, particularly when you're dealing with a place as ossified and backward-looking as CBS News, where if you move a desk, you're going to be chided by someone who's been there for a very long time about, well, what would Cronkite think of that? From my perspective, I'm just glad that someone is interested in speaking to a larger portion of America than that spoken to by the vast and overwhelming majority of media outlets that still exist. People sometimes have an inflated view of the degree to which the left still has a rock-solid hold on media, but they simply do. And all the podcasts that are out there, all the different newsletters that are out there, the websites that offer an alternative view, they are all pushing the rock up the hill. They're still David versus Goliath in terms of the hegemony that continues to control our media landscape. We'll see what happens at CBS under this new leadership regime, whether they're able to actually have a foothold for an alternate view. But one thing I would expect, and expect to happen very quickly, it's happening already, is leaking pushback and anger from all the people who are already in charge, who feel that any kind of competing voice, even one that is, in my view, a liberal contrarian in Barry Weiss, because very few people ideologically would categorize her as a traditional conservative and certainly not a Republican. I do think that this is a scenario where you could see potentially actual journalism being done on a scale that it deserves in America and hasn't had for a long time from any source other than Fox and a handful of compatriots out there who've been willing to bootstrap themselves up to tell the stories Americans deserve to know, but that the hegemony of the left Democrat media complex does not want you to know. So, good wishes to Barry Weiss. Congratulations on the opportunity for her and her Free Press friends. I hope that they have fun with this experience and that they don't come out at the end saying, no, legacy media, it truly is a dead space. No one can go there anymore. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm Ben Domenech. You can follow me on X at bdomenech. You can write the show at bigben@fox.com. And I hope that you will contribute your comments and thoughts on our YouTube page. Write a review if you like the show and share it with your friends. We really appreciate all the feedback we've gotten in the last couple of months, and I hope that it continues. We'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.